Hello, lovely podcast people. I hope you are well. This episode is the long-awaited episode on protein and children. I did consider doing 2 episodes, and maybe I still will, depending on what questions I get back as a result of this. Please do keep sending those through in whatever format. To guarantee you get really great answers, the best way to do that is on my website, martin-macdonald.com. /podcast, I guess, and then just clicking the suggestions and feedback thing. You can just click there if you want to, you can write episodes. And this episode has come from many questions about protein in children, and then I put something on Instagram and a load more questions came in. So there's some good stuff for me to cover, but the questions were just, this is the best thing, is when you guys, loads of you ask the same question, I think, you know what, it's worth my while going and doing a decent episode on this topic. And the other reason that I'm particularly enthused or was enthused to do this was because I genuinely see a fair amount of food/parenting anxiety. Lots of you are aware that I love parenting and I love being able to give advice when asked on aspects of nutrition and or parenting and or both. And so I see this anxiety with people with young children, normally their first child, and normally younger ages, like particularly after weaning, post-weaning, and then during maybe some of the slightly fussier formative years, your kind of 3s, 4s, 5s, in that stage where maybe they're still consuming some bottled milk or formula, or just a bottle of milk before bed or every so often, and it's somewhat of a comforter that they might be using. And I'll just say this now, actually, slightly off topic, but hugely beneficial. 2 things that I've, again, just see in, essentially friends with children is, and also through just mentoring lots of nutritionists over the years who have then had children and just discussions, a really common thing is that a child will be consuming too many calories from milk. They love milk, they're used to it, it's great, reminds them of num-nums, booby milk. Num-nums is what I used to call breastfeeding when I was a kid. When I was breastfeeding, as many of you know, I was breastfed until I was 5. So a bit weird, remember stuff. And you consume those calories, and therefore you're, it's like, oh, he or she's not eating, he or she won't finish their food or eat this, but then they're just guzzling down hundreds of calories from milk. So by restricting that, limiting it, getting to the point of actually measuring out and reducing, you'll see the appetite for food start to go up, and that's really helpful. We know that we just boatloads of milk, and especially when they go from being breastfed to eating food, and we want them to be absorbing iron and lots of the non-heme iron sources that children might be getting. Consuming lots of milk around that can actually slightly reduce the absorption of that. So it's, milk's still great. You can consume it at other times, dairy in general, but try not to just have it taking up too much space in the diet, I suppose. The other one that I'll just say, this was just really off topic, was just juices, squashes. I've said this before, but again, people I see really struggling with children, with fussiness, with not wanting to eat certain foods, struggling with getting them to go with variety. And then it's just such a common thing. And it fits, it's not just pure observations and anecdotes. It fits with the research on taste perception and just these insanely sweet, I'll call them kids' juices, squashes, whatever you want to call them. And they're just sipping these between meals, like, oh, I'm thirsty. And parents being like almost hyper vigilant of like, oh, I've got to keep my kid hydrated, make sure they drink enough. And so they're, trying to encourage it, and they will drink more if it tastes amazing like these squashes do, but then struggling with their food. I've always kind of said, well, my children really don't have any squash with me ever, and keeping that out of their diet for as long as possible, I think, is just a great thing that you can do. Like, water's brilliant. They love water as children, generally, if all's well. Anyway, so just a thing to consider. Most certainly not having it at the start of a meal, because I've said this before. They sit down at the table, they take a sip of this thing that just basically tastes like rainbows and happiness and love and affection and good things, kids' drugs. And then you say to them, right, eat your peas or eat your broccoli or eat your whatever. And they're like, hell no, like that tastes like unhappiness. So, yeah. Anyway, on to the topic of protein after about 5 million hours of chat. It's quite an easy one. How much protein should my children... And I've got boatloads of questions actually written just from these places down. Yeah, there's like 20, 30 different questions. Lots of them under kind of half-decent banners. The main thing I wanted to say, really, and the main thing I want to get rid of is this food anxiety for parents. Like, just freaking out. And this was one thing, even with me, there's a short period I was like, oh my goodness, like I really, really do care if they have protein at lunch. So when we were out on day trips, I was like, oh, like, I was always thinking, okay, if I'm taking like a picnic basket and then, or not basket, just a picnic pack up. And where can I was really thinking about protein, and I always think just about variety, but it was always like variety and protein, fruit and veg and carbs and variety, but then it was like protein. Where's my protein? And there was just a thing. I was like, why am I doing that? Like they don't need it as much as I think it's stressing me, and as much as I'm trying to ensure they have it. And I've never tried to push protein on them, but I know parents are like, they need to have a serving, whatever that really means, of protein at each meal. And they really start to treat their children like themselves. So if they're like really healthy eaters, or they're athletes or anything like that, and they just get this anxiety that is just really, really not founded. So, and people say to me like, how much protein do kids need, and do we need to emphasize it? Do they need to have like these feedings like adults every whatever hours? And it's like, no, stop applying your like weight loss, fitness industry, health even industry narratives to kids. What do kids really need? Energy. Like almost number one, I'd say energy. I say almost because the Medical Research Council in Africa has done some great work in terms of just providing children with energy, but not micronutrients and an actual nutritional density. And actually you end up, if they grow, but they're not growing with the right minerals, they actually end up worse off because they're growing, and therefore their needs of those are like depleting stores, and it's not good. So in terms of, aid and stuff like that, there's some good research. But anyway, talking from this position of like hopefully somewhat food adequacy, they need energy. Energy is super important. And I do get these questions of, well, they're going for carb and fat foods. And it's like, yeah, because those foods taste great and they're growing and they need calories. Happy days, like as long as they've got food variety. So I just want to put it in perspective. Like past... like you can just go on the internet and type in, how protein needs for children. You can just look up these numbers. The thing I want to say is you just get these absolute values. So it will say, 15 grams of protein for a 3-year-old, for instance. And it's like, what? Why exactly that amount? What if I've got a big kid? What if I've got a small kid? How much? And that's where it can become tricky. And that's why it's just a shame, really, that we don't have more relative dietary prescriptions relative to the size, relative to the body weight. With something like protein, you can do that. So for protein, you can pretty much, and someone asked, it was just like a question about puberty. Anyway, I can't find it right this second. It doesn't matter. Does puberty change the needs of protein, this, that, and the other? And the amount that protein needs change with things like puberty and age is so small outside of, pre-pubertal versus post-pubescent, is so small outside of just how much the kid weighs. You just don't worry. And especially as probably the recommendations that I will tell you now kind of circumvent that anyway. Now, so first of all, the dietary guidelines that we're given are still based on quite outdated methodology, but it's good enough. And the reason it's also good enough is because in the Western world, mostly we are in a position where we get enough protein and it's all good and you guys can stop worrying about it. In general, like even as adults, we're getting enough protein to not be protein malnourished. And we're eating more than the recommendations, like 150% of the recommendations, give or take. 50% more than the recommendations, which is great, and actually probably optimal is ever so slightly more than that for healthy aging and longevity and appetite control and aging healthily into older age in terms of bone health and body composition and stuff. But anyway, so coming back to what I was saying is, if you've got a 5-year-old and they're of the median weight, and you can just weigh your kid, right? But again, it's like the good thing is when I say that, immediately some people will be triggered. Now, weighing your children doesn't have to be. They've got no real concept of that. So my children, they'll jump on my scales, and in fact, the other day, I think they were going for a bath or something, and they came in to the bathroom, and I think Arlo was the first one to get on the scales, and he got on them, and the number comes up, and again, it's kind of like, I'm sure some people would almost be emotional over it because the scales being such a negative thing in their life growing up, and now they're as an adult, but he gets on. And then he, if you're on Spotify now, you can click down the bottom and actually the video will come up, and YouTube, you can see me. But those of you listening on Apple or elsewhere, you won't be able to do it. But if you just imagine like bending your knees and gritting your teeth, and he was looking down, and he was essentially trying to make himself heavier. So he was pushing down, and he was squatting, trying to make the number go up. And he was so annoyed that it couldn't. And then Orly was let me try, and she got on. And then she's unbelievably flexible. She does a full squat, and she's trying to make themselves weigh more so that they're stronger and better superheroes, whatever. So, and they're oh, I'm a whatever number, and they want to be bigger than the other one. It's always bigger is better and older and higher number and whatever. So it's quite nice in terms of really what happens to some children and adults. And I'll just say this, I actually probably should have said this in another podcast I did but it wasn't about calories for children, but just talking about this, don't talk to your kids about this stuff. I probably should have said that at the beginning, sorry. Don't talk to them about this. Kids don't need to know this detail. I'm doing this podcast for you as an adult to reduce your anxiety and stop being a gimp to yourself and to them. And you can covertly have a look at their dietary adequacy if you think for some reason that they're not eating enough protein. And you can change their habits through lifestyle changes and what you cook them or what you make available to them as the parent. So if you are concerned, you can go, right, like I will. It's the perfect scenario, because if you get an adult to do a food diary, they change the way they behave and they lie, both knowingly and unknowingly. Underreport, by accident, or underreport on purpose, lying. But the problem is, as soon as someone has to start writing down what they eat, or they're pouring their cereal into a bowl, watching the scale go up, they change their behaviors. It's one of the inherent issues we have with dietary research. But you are then preparing their food, they're choosing what they eat, and you're just, it's like, can I have a Baby Bell? Yeah, sure, go and grab one from the fridge. Write down one Baby Bell. Oh, like, what do you want for dinner? Oh, I want, chicken in a wrap. Okay, cool. Oh, Daddy, can you do barbecue sauce with a kiss and the mayonnaise with a hug? This is what Ollie and Arlo say to me. Yeah, sure, darling. Make you that. And then I could weigh. I've never, ever done this because I know they're fine. I've never even tried to roughly calculate their protein intake, because I know they're getting plenty, and I know it's not an issue in terms of, really lots of nutritional stuff really needs to come from a place of, there's even lots of arguments for like, don't go and get blood tests as a healthy person, because you'll potentially pick up an anomaly and then start trying to diagnose or correct and doing stuff that you don't need to do because you're absolutely fine. It's more a case of if your dietary intake is way off, like, let's have a look at stuff. Because we could tackle things before they happen. If you having barely any calcium whatsoever, it will take many years for you to screw yourself into a place of osteoporosis, because you're a nut job paleo carnivore eating gimp. People going, oh, my bones are strong and all I eat is liver. What's that, Liver King gimp? It's like, who knows? He's probably just a complete liar. And just behind closed doors, he's just eating a normal diet. But, it sounds like I'm being cynical, but, people lie about having brain tumors and then just to get people to donate money to them, and then they go, oh, I healed it with this herb. This is amazing. It's a miracle cure. You should buy it. And then they get found out for fraud and they get fined $2 million and then they go to prison or whatever for fraud. These idiots exist, sadly, in life. So where was I? Protein. Don't talk to your kids about protein. Just have a look. But so roughly, if you aim for 1 gram of protein per kilogram of your kid's weight, so if you have a 14-year-old boy or girl and they weigh whatever 50-ish kilos, it gets more difficult. I get it, as they get older, because then how are you going to get their body weight? You could just, if you just know their weight roughly from when they were a kid, or if they go for a checkup, or, I'm not teaching you how to parent your children. Again, once they get to that age, there's just different discussions to have. If you've got a 14-year-old with no body image issues, no weight issues, there's just nothing of issue. Like weighing yourselves because they're an athlete and they're like a brilliant tennis player, and you want to just know how much protein to help them, and they're really on board with it, absolutely fantastic. That's a great scenario to have in your life. If it's there's an issue where some stupid school has weighed your child, embarrassed them, then you've gone to a doctor and you asked the doctor not to say their weight out loud, and they did, and they referred to your child as overweight and blah blah blah, and then you took a baseball bat to his head, and then you got off on a technicality, and then you're not in prison, and then anyway, honestly, I've heard horror stories and I hate it, which is why I'm sort of semi-joking, semi-serious about how I would handle that situation. But I'm not telling you how to weigh your children. I'm just giving you the science. You go away and just be the best parent you can be, but be conscientious in how you do some of these things. So whatever, you've got a 7-year-old that weighs 25 kilos, whatever, you've got a 14-year-old that weighs whatever kilos, you take a median, 1 gram of their body weight in kilograms, 1 gram of protein per kilogram of their body weight. It's very, very similar to an adult. People asking like, I'll stick a reference in the show notes, but people asking like, what's the difference between, before and after puberty? Like, really interesting, the data, the research. Unfortunately, as I said, it's still based on this nitrogen balance methodology. And years ago, probably 10 years ago, maybe more, I wrote an article on the indicator amino acid oxidation method and how it was advancing our knowledge. I'm quite surprised, actually, I wrote that back then. Well, actually, maybe it was more on nitrogen balance, but then I ended up discussing the indicator amino acid oxidation method, which tends to seemingly much more accurate. So in animal research, and I don't mean animal research that then pertains to humans, I mean more like for farmers and for how to feed cattle the best to make them produce meat, and how to feed your pigs and how to feed your horses so that they run fast. Anyway, places where there's a lot of money for that kind of research. And I think there's some research in pigs, I think it was, and optimal protein feeding and stuff, but basically using the indicator amino acid oxidation method. And essentially it's a more accurate method, and it tends to show that nitrogen balance underestimates. So our current guidelines are based on that. And what we see is like for a younger child, like say 13 and below, they're growing at such a fast rate. And that's why I did that other podcast on about the calories, and idiots saying that, that's enough calories for a 5-year-old, 10-year-old, whatever. But they need more protein. But we're talking like, I think the research is like 0.95 grams per kilogram. And then they, get older to like 14, and then like 14 to 18, it's like, they need 0.85. And then as an adult, it's more like 0.8 or even just, lower end 0.6. But these are like the absolute minimums. So if you are going to look at this, like definitely aim for that or above. And then, but realistically, maybe for optimal health, which we just don't know. We don't have enough research to be able to tell us really where we should be sitting. But again, anything, I wouldn't ever lower your kids' protein intake. So if you just covertly look at them, it's like, okay, what do they have for breakfast? Right, they have a little bowl of cereal and they have some milk with that. Oh, look, there was 8 grams of protein in their breakfast, and then they, whatever, they have a piece of fruit or some fruit and dried fruit and nuts mix, if they're a bit like my children would probably eat that maybe. Like there's another 4 or 5 grams of protein, and then and then lunchtime they had some hummus and some carrots and some, I'm trying to think what they've had recently, but I'm trying to again pick the type of, I could just go lasagna for lunch or whatever, or like a chicken wrap, but they will just get so much protein from these types of foods. So I was trying to pick elsewhere, so if they have a baby bell, what, 5 grams of protein again, and then if they're having milk anywhere, there's going to be some more protein in that. And then, if they have a chicken wrap for dinner, they've got probably 5 grams of protein in the wrap itself. And then they might have, even if they have half a chicken breast, you're talking 10 grams of protein. So whatever I've just described there, 10, 5, like that's 25, 30 grams of protein. That's 30 grams of protein. And that's so little food I've just described. That's way, way less than Arlo would eat as a 5-year-old. Well, he's 6 now, but 5-year-old. And I've described 30 grams of protein at least. And he'll often ask for an extra bowl of cereal here or there and anywhere. And that's 1.5 grams per kilogram of his body weight type scenario. So it's just without even trying. He's a real meat eater. So he will, if we make pizza, he'll be grabbing if we have like roast chicken slices on the side, he'll just be eating those as we make it. Can I just have some of that? Whereas Orly is much more of a lower protein eater. And again, it's really interesting because you just see these natural tendencies. And I try to just sort of let them eat fairly intuitively, to use that word. And again, their intuition is to eat donuts and sweets and chocolate, of course, because those things taste amazing. They're high in calories and they make you feel great in the short term. But again, just kind of choosing what they eat and having extra bits of whatever. Orly will eat 200 grams of olives in a sitting. I still tried to limit her olive intake a little bit so that she eats other stuff. But so on this protein front, I hope it's just given you a little bit of an insight into like this obsession. And do you know what? I might do a second podcast, which is more like listener questions, and I'll just read them all out. I might just 1 gram per kilogram of their body weight. You can go on the internet if you don't want to weigh them and try and find out roughly what they might weigh. And just looking at like median percent, 25th to 95th, whatever percentiles, and then where they've been maybe as they were growing up, or you'll be able to work it out. Or hopefully you're in a scenario where you can just like if you're going on holiday, like you're weighing your suitcase, and then often kids will just jump on, or like I don't know. I'm just thinking of crazy stuff now. Like, I don't know why I'm making such a big deal about it, but it is just because sadly we live in a world where people I just literally saw this horrific, I'm trying to think I could call them out on air. I think it's maybe they're in Northern Ireland, some meal prep company, something meals. They posted up a transformation of like a kid who looked like maybe 9-10 years old, and the new kids, I don't think they use kids weight loss range, but it was before and afters of a kid in 4 different poses, and it's like horrific. Anyway, so I'll go into more like protein shakes and this, that and the other actually in a separate episode. That's just, you don't need to freak out. They don't need to have protein at every sitting. They just need really adequate protein over the day. If they are eating a generally good diet, remember they're getting lots of protein, even like I said, just from a wrap. The wrap contains quite a lot of protein when you're such a little being. Orly and Arlo like these things, they're called malted Wheaties. Like, I just don't know why they like them, but now I like them. Just because I'm always finishing the last few in their bowls, and then I've kind of got a taste for them. And I don't tend to eat cereal a great deal, and then it's just that thing, isn't it? Some cold milk. Anyway, you all want cereal now, right? But again, like a teeny tiny serving, a 40-ish gram serving of that will be like 25% of requirements of their protein, and then you're adding the milk, obviously. So it's just, then the wraps, then you've got a bit of dairy in there, then you've got a bit of, and again, with vegetarian, maybe this should be separate, but again, like, don't overthink it. People going like, well, what are good sources for children who don't like meat? It's like, well, just look at all the other foods, just type it into Google. Like, I'm teaching you higher level stuff here, not like super advanced, but just like, don't ask me just to be a shopping list for you. Just type into Google, list of high protein foods. What foods do they like? What don't they like? What religious or ethical decisions, like, oh, my 14-year-old son wants to be a vegetarian. He went, is he going to get enough protein? Like, cool, he's doing that. Great, support him. Go and look at vegetarian sources of protein. They're not hard to find. Vegan, yeah, it gets harder. Don't freak out about protein. Doesn't have to be at every meal. I've given you that 1 gram. Aim for 1.5 if you want, and you're like miles ahead of where you need to be. You don't need to be worrying about it too much. It's just been hugely overplayed by the health and fitness industry. Like, I even call it out on this idea, like, oh, you need to be getting 2 grams per kilogram, and like, I've said it before, coaches freaking out if their clients don't eat 2 grams per kilogram, despite the fact that they are hitting all their goals and achieving their goals, and appetite is in check, and they're getting fitter or stronger in the gym, and they feel like they're failing because they never get above 1.7. It's like, oh my goodness. Cool. Right. Hopefully that was helpful. Hopefully you can take some stuff away. Please reach out with any questions. I will do another one answering some of these specific questions, a bit more of a quick fire. Cool. Until next time, much love.